Everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. We're going to be talking about the New York City mayoral Democratic primary that is taking place tonight. We are going to be going live at about 9 p.m. Eastern to cover the results, so make sure to stay tuned for that as well. Make sure to subscribe to the channel as well and hit the like button for more content just like this. Looking at this primary, we clearly see that the runner-upper to Andrew Cuomo for the Democrat nomination is Zohran Mamdani, which is he is a person that became a citizen in 2018, and he's running on a really basically socialist platform. If you want me to be honest with you, I mean, he literally has been identified to be with the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. And he currently has this ad. He wants to lower the cost of living for working class New Yorkers, but he's also talked about, doing a freeze of the rent. That is something that he's brought up very recently. He also wants to do free healthcare. And, these things in practicality would be nice for Americans, but the major concern that people have is, in fact, for, how are these policies going to get paid for? This is the biggest concern that people have with this candidate. But I do have to say, he has been, having momentum as an authentic figure. He isn't he isn't very connected to like any of the AIPAC, lobby. So it actually ends up helping him with certain groups of voters. And it kind of helps him be a little bit more authentic than some of the other candidates per se. And we do see here him talking with voters, meeting with voters, doing more press conferences. For example, he's been going all over social media posting. He's been walking over all of New York City. He's been actually collaborating with other mayoral candidates because it is a ranked choice voting election. So like other candidates will say, okay, put me first and then put him in second. And then Mamdani will say, okay, put, me first and then put, Lander second. So when you have that, it kind of becomes this very, weird type of election. And Lander is kind of another progressive voice. So really, when you look at the polling, the majority of the New York electorate in this case is actually more progressive than it is establishment. And it is really interesting that, somebody like, Andrew Cuomo is running for the nomination. He was the former governor of the state. He resigned and got replaced by Kathy Hochul at one point. And she's now the incumbent, governor, and she even ran for re-election in 2022. We clearly see here that about 385,000 New Yorkers have already voted early compared to 191,000 in 2021. So turnout is almost double what it was back in the previous mayoral election. And 25% of early voters that participated in this one had not voted in any Democratic primary at any point between 2012 and 2024. So 25% of early voters had not voted since before 2012. That is a really long time as a Democrat to not participate in a Democratic primary, given the rise of Donald Trump and having the influence of picking, Hillary Clinton or picking Bernie Sanders for the nomination or picking Biden for the nomination. The fact that it's been that long since nearly a quarter of these voters haven't participated is a really big sign. And it is really good for Mamdani as a candidate. And we even see here 3% of early voters had never voted ever in a Democratic primary. A lot of them are probably going to be going towards Mamdani. And we look at the turnout levels here, and we can clearly see that there are these really large turnout numbers in, this part of New York City, which is where the last progressive candidate in 2021 actually ended up performing herself very well against Eric Adams. So this is kind of the same coalition that was going to help Maya Wiley end up getting elected. But, clearly, Zohran has a little bit more support in this, election as opposed, to as opposed to Maya. Zohran has a lot more of a support base, but this is clearly where you see the higher turnout taking place. And this is mostly probably for where Mamdani is getting his votes from. And he's made this major effort to push early for early voting because, he's able to get out a lot of his base. And obviously the majority, the majority of voters will vote on election day. And you see that Cuomo has said, I think you've seen a high turnout across the board of the numbers that I hear. And that's a good thing. The higher the turnout, the better. I think you will see higher turnout because I think New Yorkers are scared and they're worried, which he's basically trying to talk about, basically saying that he's kind of playing down the importance of youth turnout. And we even see a spokesperson for the Cuomo campaign said the last poll was an outlier, which actually had Mamdani winning in the final round. An Emerson College poll in the final round actually had Mamdani up by quite a bit. And their last poll at the end of May actually had Cuomo up 9 points in the final round. So that is really, really interesting to see that Mamdani has gained quite a bit recently and has been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, has been endorsed by AOC, been endorsed by all these progressive types. And now, even in the latest ballot, you have a really, really close Cuomo +2 on the first ballot, and after all the votes are tabulated, you end up getting Mamdani +4. And the last poll before that was June 9th through the 12th, Marist College. By May, that poll's already too old. But in both polls, you can clearly see that Mamdani has gained support there. But really, Cuomo has been leading most of the polling data for some time. There was even a point where I guess some guy, Letitia James, was actually ahead in this poll in the New York Times last year in a college poll. Letitia James was ahead by 1% against Cuomo. That's like really, really interesting. I would have never expected that to be the case. That is really fascinating that is the case. And then Mamdani started at 1% at the beginning of February. Just FYI, guys, at 1%, and Eric Adams was still in the primary and was getting basically shellacked by Cuomo. And then Mamdani ended up gaining by the end of March, got to 10%, then rose to 16, then rose to 22 with Cuomo at a pretty big amount. And you even see Mamdani at 23 in this one. And then now in the final poll here, he's at about 34. So he's been on this upward trajectory the entire time. Well, Cuomo's kind of been stagnating to an extent where he is. He's been stagnating for quite some time. He hasn't really lost support to an extent. He's been kind of hovering around, 35 to 40%. It's just Mamdani has been getting that coalition together. And with other candidates putting Mamdani in their second or third place in the ballot while leaving Cuomo basically out of their ballot, in a final round, you could have Mamdani actually win by closer to 10 points if there is a really big movement. But of course, Cuomo has the money advantage. The spending advantage is definitely a big factor. The fact that he was the former governor of the state does help out quite extensively. In his case, it helps him out quite a bit to have been the former governor of the state. And so with that, you're going to have a really close final round, and all of the votes are not tabulated until July 1st. All of the ranked choice voting will probably not be finished tabulated until July 1st, which is quite a long time, to be honest with you. So we won't know the final results for a week. But if Cuomo is only ahead by less than 5 points on the first ballot, it probably means he's going to end up losing that election. And when you look at the previous results from 2021, you clearly see that Eric Adams is, taking this away, with about a 31%, vote share to Maya Wiley's 21%, Catherine Garcia at basically 20%, and Andrew Yang was even at 12% at a given point in time. So, it's very interesting to see all of the coalitions in the Democratic primary take place like this. Copper shortages just went political. Washington's eyeing import tariffs, and the scramble for homegrown supply is on. Prices are brushing $4.85 a pound, while global stockpiles sit at 15-year lows. Enter Giant Mining Corp, advancing the 980-acre Majuba Hill project in mining-ready Nevada. Recent drilling cut a 170-foot zone averaging 0.4% copper, crowned by a 10-foot streak at 4.4%, grades that the majors pay billions for. Independent engineers at ResPec are already modeling the force resource estimate, so Majuba moves while rivals wrestle with the new red tape. Speed wins the super cycle, and they are built for speed. Dig deeper at giantminingcorp.com, on the OTC at BFGFF in the US and BFG in Canada. As for Eric Adams, what's really interesting about Eric is that he's actually running as an independent candidate in this election. And, he's kind of swayed away from the Democratic primary and the party as a whole, especially after some of the things, that were coming out about him, a lot of these corruption allegations, which he believes the Democratic establishment and other groups were going against him because he opposed the open border policies of the Biden administration. And because of that, he believes that he was chastised from the party and they had Cuomo run against him in order to oust him out of the nomination. And now he's running as an independent candidate on his own. And he's actually been doing live streams with Sneeko, and he's been doing live streams with Kai Cenat, which for an independent candidate in New York City, I actually think that is literally that is the perfect move for him to make. Is do a lot of these streams with these streamers. Unlike what a lot of political consultants would tell you, doing these are actually going to help him out quite massively. To be completely honest with you. So that is where you see this really big coalition being put together for Mamdani coming in the future. And a lot of the Yang voters, I suspect a lot of them will vote for Mamdani. A lot of the Maya Wiley voters will probably, most of them will probably break for him as well. And you're having a lot more early voting turnout this time around, which I think is just going to favor Mamdani as a whole. Supposedly, election day voting isn't so low turnout. It's actually pretty decent, which is going to help out Cuomo because that's where, Cuomo's going to get a lot of his vote share from. But the one X factor that you're going to see here is the fact that the weather is very hot. As of 3 p.m. is 102 degrees in New York City, and the humidity up there, the dryness up there is probably not great. It's this humidity at 29% and winds are very low. So it's a very, very hot environment in New York City. And that is going to be a very big factor in election day turnout, especially when everybody gets out at 5 p.m. The heat is literally at 101 degrees. We can see right here approaching 6 p.m., which is not going to be great for Cuomo because Cuomo in the polling data is performing way better with older voters, which tend to turn out more on election day. And a lot of them will probably end up voting today. And so because of that, you are going to have a lot of, you may have a possible turnout drop for Cuomo because of that. And if you look at the early voting in each of the boroughs, you clearly see the Bronx is a lot higher. Brooklyn and Manhattan, this is a lot of where the white population is. This is where Mamdani in the primary is doing very well in. He's doing very well with white voters, and you clearly see the turnout here is double what it was back in 2021. You're having way higher turnout numbers in Brooklyn and Manhattan, which is where Maya Wiley overperformed compared to most other candidates, and she was the more progressive candidate. And so I do think you are going to have Mamdani have a big advantage in some of these areas. We can clearly see here Mamdani said the poll was a sign that New Yorkers were uniting around his vision. I'm thankful to many of the supporters who have volunteered and cast their votes for me during early voting, but we can't stop here. We also see that amongst age groups, the groups that are turning out the most here are 25 to 34 and 18 to 24. Well, they're actually pretty low, but 25 to 44 are turning out at pretty decently high rates. So it's not like a completely skewed electorate towards young voters, but it's still a little bit more young leaning than it would typically be in a normal election anywhere in general. So we'll go over some of the initial results that come in. And so if you guys do want to check that out, make sure to go ahead and keep an eye out for that. And make sure to go ahead and to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed this episode of On Point Politics. And I will see you guys very, very soon.